Hello and welcome to my channel where we discuss, critique, and analyze, share book recommendations, do book tags, and so much more. I'm Ainsley, and in today's video we will be discussing The Pale Horse, or the book of Agatha Christie's that I like to call the one that saved lives and solved crimes. I will be talking about that more in part 3, but for part 1 we are going to be discussing things in a more spoiler-free zone for all of those who haven't read it before, by talking about themes, atmosphere, and the plot, and a little bit of character description before moving into the spoiler section of the video, where we go in a little bit more depth of things that have been happening in the book. This is very similar to my previous video where I discuss Crooked House, so if you haven't seen that one out, please go in the description box below and click on it. You can also go to my Agatha Christie playlist to watch any of the Agatha Christie videos that I've had before. So let's get to it. Pale Horse was first released on November 6 in 1961, and upon its release it was received with great reviews from both critics and audiences of Agatha Christie. The book is quite different from a lot of her work, so when I was looking back on this, I was a little bit surprised. It is a lot more atmospheric than some of her other works. I would say Halloween is probably her most atmospheric book outside of The Pale Horse, and a lot of the imagery that you see, the overall theme, and everything that goes along with it really puts that into perspective, and it's also very folksy as well. The main theme of this is black magic and the occult and just culty magic and all of that in general. And this really comes into with, you have the Pale Horse, which comes from the Bible, Revelation 6:8. And the overall atmosphere is also just very mystical and spiritual, and along with the Pale Horse, where the Pale Horse came in and it was ridden by death, and the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and you also have the 3 witches that are part of the Pale Horse Inn, and this is a reference to Shakespeare's Macbeth, as they are not only 3 witches, but they are also 3 Scottish witches. Now, if you've seen this miniseries of the same name that is adapted from this novel, it is quite different than the book, so if you have watched it, I still highly recommend picking up the book. My personal thoughts on this is that when I first started reading it, I wasn't really a big fan. I didn't connect with it within like the first chapter or the first 2 chapters, but then I quickly turned around because I really began to dive in to the mysticism and what was added to it. I think when there's a part in the book that really does bother me, and especially from today's perspective, we can read it in this way, and maybe others didn't necessarily grab onto it, but there's a part where she mentions Europeans are not going to believe in this stuff, and in mentioning white people, and in my personal belief, the most part is going to be like English people, because you do have the 3 Scottish witches, which is why I believe that they were changed to just being English in the television series, as both Celtic and Irish people, or both Scottish and Irish people, and their history are just kind of believed to be a lot more keen on that stuff, a lot more in tune with that stuff. So there's definitely a lot of prejudicial things, and sometimes it's hard to say, is like, oh, is this her recognizing this and knowing this to be true, or is this her coming out of it? And I think it's just always important to acknowledge that when you're talking about it, and to acknowledge some of the faults that you recognize in books that you really like, in authors that you really like, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And in reality, I think this can be a really good component of the story, because you do have this Englishman going to Much Deeping, which is the village in the book, and it is quite a bit different than anything that he's seen before, and he starts investigating the Pale Horse Inn and talks with Thersha Gray, who is the very interesting head of the witches. She's like the main witch, and so it's just interesting to see the how some, because you do have characters like Puppy and Grace who are a lot more believing, or at least a lot more fearful, where Mark Esterbrook, who is your narrator, is not so caught up in the mystical side of it all, and he thinks a lot more logically. He is a writer, he's a historian, and so he just jumps in and wants to investigate the possibility of a murder. And of course, there's going to be this logical explanation, but I think it also comes into it that it's also really important to keep an open mind, because you don't know what you're going to miss if you don't keep that open mind. A character that appears in this one, who is a recurring character in other works by Agatha Christie, is Ariadne Oliver. Ariadne Oliver had appeared in at least 5 other books by this point, and this was her first one in 5 years. And her last one before this, she appeared in the Hercule Poirot novel Dead Man's Folly. Also in this is Rhoda Dawes and Major Despard, who appeared in Cards on at the Table, another book in which Ariadne Oliver appeared. Reverend Dane Cathrop and his wife also appeared, and they had originally appeared in The Moving Finger. This is one of those books that I noticed a lot more of the recurring elements to it. There is some other things that maybe just reading a little bit too much into it, but mentions of Paddington, because that's a part of England anyway, so they're probably going to be mentioned in more than one. But it's just always interesting to know that these characters, this world exists, and that it's a much bigger universe than just these books, or this book is on its own, and then you have the Hercule Poirot ones over here. But no, they exist in the same universe, and then you have Miss Marple, who also exists in that universe, and I find that to be very, very interesting. Father Gorman, a Roman Catholic priest, gives Mrs. Davis, a dying woman, her last rites. She then gives him a confession and a list of names and a terrible secret. It is before he can take action that he is struck in the dead in the fog. And this adds to a lot of that mysticism and that feeling of something encroaching on the town of Much Deeping and the people in it. As the police begin to investigate, a young hero begins to piece together evidence that sets him upon a converging path. So we have our main character, Mark Esterbrook, who is a lot more logical, and he begins helping the inspector investigate this case based on things that he had personally witnessed, and that begins to converge with the investigation into the death of Father Gorman, and then into the Pale Horse Inn. We are introduced to Mark Esterbrook when he witnesses a fight between 2 girls at a coffee bar, and one of them, Thomasina, ends up getting her hair pulled out, and this is an important clue, and I love the way they did it in the book, and he ends up recognizing this as being odd. They part ways, and at dinner with a friend, Poppy, she ends up mentioning the Pale Horse that arranges deaths, and she is suddenly scared upon mentioning this, and she will not say any more. Mark encounters the police surgeon, Corrigan, and he learns that a list of surnames were found in the shoe of the murdered priest, and the list includes the names Corrigan, Tuckerton, and Hesketh Dubois, the same name as Mark's godmother, who has recently died of what appear to be natural causes. He begins to fear that the list contains the names of those who are dead or surely. This causes Mark to go to the village of Much Deeping. This was organized by his cousin, and he ends up meeting with the famous writer Ariadne Oliver. This is pretty much a glorified cameo. She's not in it for quite some time, and I have to say I was a bit disappointed in that because I do love the character of Ariadne Oliver. She's a very autobiographical character in regards to our dear Agatha Christie, as she does write about a Finnish detective, and I wish we got a little bit more time with. He hears about a house which has been converted from an old inn called the Pale Horse. The house is inhabited by 3 modern witches led by Thurcia Gray. Visiting houses in the area, he meets Mr. Venables, a man who uses a wheelchair and has no apparent explanation for his substantial wealth. Mark also visits the Pale Horse, and Thurcia Gray discusses with him the ability to kill at a distance, which he claims to have developed. And I just kind of wonder, like, why are you... I guess because when you're talking about something like magic, which can or at least may not be able to be proven by science, by investigations by the police, you're probably going to be a little bit more cocky about it, but I just don't understand why she would do that. I guess she's arrogant. She's definitely got that arrogance going on for her. In retrospect, it seems to Mark that she has been outlining to him a service that she would be willing to provide. As part of the police investigation, a witness, Zachary Osborne, describes a man seen following Father Gorman shortly before the murder. Later, Osborne tells the police that he has seen the same man in a wheelchair, even though he finds out that the man Venables is crippled by polio and is incapable of standing due to the atrophy of his legs. Osborne remains certain of his identification and suggests that Venables could have faked his disability. I guess I understand now. This is how she gets her services done, or at least known. She can't just put it on a business card like, hello, I can use magic to kill whoever you want to be killed. No, she's gotta find some other way to do it. Mark's girlfriend, Hermia, does not take this growing fear seriously, and he becomes disaffected with her. He does, however, receive support from Ariadne Oliver and from the vicar's wife, Dame Calthorpe, who wants him to stop whatever evil might be taking place. Mark also makes an ally of Catherine Ginger Corrigan, a girl whom he has met in the area and who successfully draws Poppy out about the Pale Horse organization. Ginger obtains from Poppy an address in Birmingham where Mark meets Mr. Bradley, a disbarred lawyer, who outlines the means by which the Pale Horse functions without breaking the law. That Bradley bets someone will die within a certain period of time and the client bets otherwise. If the person in question does die within the time period, the client must pay. One client who refused fell in front of an oncoming train and was killed. With the agreement of Inspector Lejeune and the cooperation of Ginger, Mark agrees to solicit the murder of his first wife, who will be played by Ginger. At a ritual of some kind with the Pale Horse, Mark witnesses Thurcia apparently channel a malignant spirit through an electrical channel apparatus. Mark witnesses Thurcia apparently channel a malignant spirit through an electrical apparatus. Shortly afterwards, Ginger falls ill and begins to decline rapidly. In desperation, Mark turns to Poppy again, who mentions that friend resigned from a research organization called CRC, Customers' Reactions Classified, that seems to be connected with the Pale Horse. When Mrs. Brandon is interviewed, she reveals that both she and Mrs. Davis worked for the organization, which surveyed targeted people about what foods, cosmetics, and proprietary medicines they used. Something that is really good about the way that this whole entire story is executed is that it really it has all these different pieces of the puzzle and it brings them together very well, which is not always a great thing when you have so many characters. I find that often, especially in a mystery, when you have fewer characters, it often works out a lot better for people. But in some cases, like this for the Pale Horse, it really bodes well for them to have a lot of characters as long as it is executed well, and it is here in the Pale Horse. Ariadne Oliver contacts Mark with a key connection that she has made. Another victim of the Pale Horse, Mary Delafonte, has lost her hair during her illness. The same thing happened to Lady Hesketh Dubois, and Thomasina's hair was easily pulled out during the fight. I remember that being something that really stood out to me, just discussions of her hair and what they see, and in such a small moment, you really just get how important it is to have all these moments really tie in and how that works within a mystery. Moreover, Ginger has begun to shed her own hair. Mark recognized in the symptoms of thallium poisoning, not some sort of satanic assassination. It is revealed that Osborne has been the brains behind the Pale Horse organization, and that black magic element was a piece of misdirection on his part. The murders were committed by replacing products the victims had named in the CRC survey with poisoned ones. Osborne's clumsy attempt to implicate Venables was a vital mistake. After Osborne's arrest, Mark and Ginger, who's recovering, become engaged. Now, thallium poison wasn't something that was particularly well known. At least in this case, thallium was used as a rat poison, and so a lot of people didn't know it too much at the time, which it makes it very understandable that people wouldn't get what is happening. And when you're also dealing with a small town and people's fear and people's opposition to a more credible reason, a credible source of what could be causing this problem, it becomes a lot more difficult. And it's easy in a mystery setting to put things into that perspective and to have that opposition, and you have people like Mark who just knows that this this is not something that's, witchcraft, it's not from the occult, it's not satanic. And then you have other people that are a lot more inclined to believe that to be the truth. And so it's a lot easier for someone to manipulate those people and at a greater part manipulate that situation. As mentioned at the beginning of this video, Agatha Christie's book, The Pale Horse, ended up not only saving lives, but solving crimes. Unfortunately, with those, it also may be the inspiration for what is referred to as the Mensa murders. So let's discuss this. It was in 1975 that Agatha Christie received a letter from a woman in Latin America. She recognized the symptoms of thallium poison, thus saving a woman from slow poisoning by her husband. I remember, I actually knew this story before I'd ever read the book, because this one I had read for the first time last year. And it's very interesting to think of how you can just be sitting there reading a mystery, something is happening in your life that's very serious, and you come across the end of this and see all the symptoms and are like, hey, this is happening to my friend. She's being killed, she's being poisoned by thallium. That is wild to me. 2 years later, in 1977, a 19-month-old infant was suffering from a mysterious illness. After the baby was flown to London, Marcia Maitland, a nurse who had been reading The Pale Horse, correctly suggested that the baby was suffering from thallium poisoning. It was in another instance in 1971, a serial killer, Graham Frederick Young, who had poisoned several people, 3 fatally, was caught thanks to this book. A doctor conferring with Scotland Yard had read The Pale Horse and realized that the mysterious Bovington bug, the deaths occurred in a factory in Bovington, England, was in fact thallium poisoning. I also really wonder, how many other incidents could there possibly have been where someone read this book and recognized that something was not right? Or if there were some other books of hers, because she really loved her poisons. The novel is also cited to have been the inspiration for what is now dubbed the Mensa murder. In 1988, George Treple, a Mensa Club member, poisoned his neighbors Pi and Peggy Carr and their children by putting thallium into their Coca-Cola classic bottles, 8-pack. Peggy Carr succumbed while the others survived. That's sad. It's hard to say if the Pale Horse is really the reason why he did this. I think he could find so many other ways, but he would have found another way. But I can imagine that could be hard if you find that out, that this could be uh, yeah, like this could be a reason. This could be in some way an inspiration into how this person killed these people. That can be very hurtful and alarming. But I'm glad that these young people survived. I really feel bad for them for losing their mother and that they had to go through this. Um, but yeah, people are sick, bro. People are sick. The book has been adapted two separate times, one in the Agatha Christie's Miss Marple series, though Miss Marple does not appear in the book, and also in a 2-episode miniseries that appears on Amazon Prime in the US. Now, both of these adaptations are quite different than the book, so if you've seen one or both and you have not read the book, I do highly recommend checking out the book. As I said before, it's very mystical and atmospheric. It's very different in a lot of ways to much of Agatha Christie's work, and it changes things up a bit. And I really feel like she tried something new, and it worked out for her. So if this is the kind of thing that you would be interested in checking out, if it's an Agatha Christie book that you haven't read yet and were wondering if you like, I hope that this was able to do something for you. Also, if you are a fan of just mysteries in general, or you've read this book and just wanted to watch this video, I hope it wasn't super boring for you and you had a good time and you made it this far. I'm trying some different things and how I want to do this, as I want to do this to, if not all, a good number of Agatha Christie books. So if you want to see more like this, please stick around, like this video if you liked it, subscribe and ring the bell to be notified every single time I post, and comment below telling me what is your favorite Agatha Christie book, or what is your favorite mystery, or what do you think of The Pale Horse? Let me know in the comments below. It would really help me out, and I would love to hear from you. Thank you again. Bye.